Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on data for climate risk assessment in vulnerable communities. This webinar is being co-hosted by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and the nonprofit Center for Open Data Enterprise, known as CODE. I'm Joel Gurin, and I'm the president of CODE. We're an independent nonprofit organization here in Washington whose mission is to maximize the value of open and shared data for the public good. We're excited to be collaborating with NOAA to bring you this webinar today, and very pleased to see such a great turnout. Today's webinar will be followed by a roundtable tomorrow on data for climate risk assessment, also co-hosted by NOAA. Our work with NOAA is the latest of many projects that CODE has conducted with the White House and a wide range of federal agencies since we were founded in 2015. Webinars and roundtables like these help address critical gaps between data users and data providers and help everyone collaborate to use data to solve public problems. In addition to our webinars and roundtables, CODE publishes research reports with insights, best practices, and recommendations on utilizing data for public good. We also develop resources for the US and international data community, including several websites and online tools. You can visit our website at opendataenterprise.org to find more information and read our latest reports. CODE would also like to thank our partners at Amazon for their support of our work on this webinar, tomorrow's roundtable, and our related reports on this project. The Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative seeks to accelerate sustainability research and innovation by minimizing the cost and time required to acquire and analyze large sustainability data sets. They support innovators and researchers with the data, tools, and technical expertise they need to move sustainability to the next level. Our other Amazon partner, Amazon Web Services, provides a reliable, scalable, low-cost infrastructure platform in the cloud that powers hundreds of thousands of businesses in 190 countries around the world, and that is helping to make climate-related data available worldwide. You'll hear from our Amazon partners later in this program. Today's webinar is part of a project to help governments and local communities use data from a wide range of sources to assess their risks from climate change. Understanding those risks is the first step to becoming more climate resilient, and data is the key to that understanding. We're going to talk today about using data to gauge the risks of climate hazards like hurricanes and wildfires, and to look at social and other factors that may make communities especially vulnerable to those risks. And we'll look at these issues from the perspective of the federal government, local leaders, and the private sector. We have an outstanding lineup of speakers today, and they'll begin in a minute. Just a few notes before we start. First, we're recording this webinar and we'll share it on CODE's YouTube channel later today. We'll send all of you a link to the recording when it's available, and we'll also send you a link to the briefing paper that CODE has produced for this project. We encourage you to share this information with friends and colleagues who may also be interested. Second, we'll have a brief session at the end of the webinar where our speakers will expand on their talks and answer some questions from the audience. Please feel free to send us your questions during the presentations by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. You can use that function to send us any comments you have as well. We won't be able to answer all your questions, but your questions and comments will be very helpful to us as we continue our work on this topic. And finally, please feel free to tweet about this webinar using the handle @ODEnterprise and use the hashtag #ClimateRiskData. Again, @ODEnterprise and hashtag #ClimateRiskData. Thank you for helping us spread the word. Now, I'm going to introduce our opening speaker. We're very honored to have with us Don Graves, the Deputy Secretary of the US Department of Commerce. Mr. Graves has decades of experience in the private sector, government, and nonprofit leadership. Most recently, he served as counselor to President Joe Biden during the 2020 presidential campaign. Prior to that, he served as Executive Vice President and Head of Corporate Responsibility and Community Relations at KeyBank. Mr. Deputy Secretary, over to you.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. Thank you, Joel, for that kind introduction. Throughout my career, I've witnessed the impact that extreme weather can have on our communities and our economy. For example, after Hurricane Katrina, I traveled to Louisiana to support economic development and small businesses that were devastated by the storm. Hurricane Floyd hit the East Coast just days ahead of my wedding in 1999. People associate 2020 With the year, we experienced the worst global pandemic in over a century. But last year also set a record on the climate change front. A total of 22 weather and climate events cost the US over $96 billion. Tragically, climate change, extreme heat, and water scarcity disproportionately affect low-income households and communities of color. That's why you're all here today, because communities need localized data to make decisions about their own climate risk. Integrating data from across the government and private sectors, acting on that data, and then sharing best practices is inherently challenging. But this type of information will help build stronger and more resilient communities, particularly those that are most at risk from climate threats. Fortunately, we're seeing data sharing across the country. For example, this summer, NOAA and partner scientists, citizen volunteers, and community coordinators embarked on an urban heat mapping campaign in 11 states. Together, they produced detailed local maps that give city officials and community groups the life-saving information they need to protect people from extremely high temperatures. That's just one example of incredible partnership that not only makes data more accessible to local decision makers, but also helps build productive public-private partnerships around climate risk data more broadly. I'm excited that the Department of Commerce and NOAA are well represented today. Our scientists are at the forefront, providing world-class data and innovative solutions to address the climate crisis. Thank you to our co-hosts and partners for joining the discussion today and for working with us to drive data towards a meaningful climate action. We look forward to strengthening our partnership on this important issue moving forward. With that, I'll turn it over to Ben Friedman to kick off our roundtable discussion.
Hi, I'm Ben Friedman, the Deputy Undersecretary for Operations for NOAA, and I'm excited to welcome you all to this webinar today. For over 50 years, NOAA has been the world leader in climate science and services, and our climate science is the foundation for smart policy and decision-making in a changing world. We deliver climate services to federal agencies, states, tribes, communities, and businesses across America, and our climate stewardship protects our lands, waters, resources, and people. From the sea to the sun and coast to coast, NOAA is observing, measuring, monitoring, and collecting data using satellites, ships, buoys, planes, drones, and more. Our publicly accessible data feeds into NOAA's world-class climate and weather models, which provide Americans with daily, weekly, and monthly weather forecasts and longer-term climate projections. This information is especially critical for communities most vulnerable to climate change and its impacts. And NOAA is well positioned to support the Biden-Harris administration's whole of government effort to tackle the climate crisis while ensuring we do so in just and equitable ways. NOAA is constantly looking for opportunities to improve our tools and enhance our services to the public. That's why I'm thrilled that NOAA has partnered with the Center for Open Data Enterprise, or CODE, to co-host this roundtable. NOAA cannot do this alone, and the roundtable provides a forum for us to convene diverse stakeholders to develop action-oriented, data-driven solutions to reduce, prepare for, and adapt to climate-related risks. As you listen to the speakers today, I hope that we can all come together to identify new areas of collaboration with stakeholders across the public, private, academic, state, and local levels, explore strategies to increase access to and the use of climate data, and share best practices for incorporating data into climate solutions. Finally, I want to thank CODE for co-hosting today's event, and to Amazon Web Services and the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative for their support. And thank you for coming together to engage on this important topic. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Co Barrett, to provide keynote remarks on the importance of climate data for developing climate risk policy. Ms. Barrett is widely recognized globally as an expert on climate policy, particularly on issues related to climate impacts and strategies to help society adapt to a changing world. She currently serves as a senior advisor for climate for NOAA's Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, where she provides strategic advice and scientific leadership for climate research, applications, and services across NOAA research, working to coordinate and integrate activities across NOAA's portfolio of climate-related programs to enhance the effectiveness of NOAA in meeting climate mission goals. Ms. Barrett is also currently serving as a vice chair for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, a role she has held since 2017. Thank you again, and Co, I now turn the floor over to you.
Let me begin by congratulating all who conceived of and organized this roundtable on how to evolve our climate data services to help guide and inform climate risk policy. This is such an important topic, and it's such a critical time in our nation's history. It feels like all the planets have aligned. We have a president who has made it a priority from day one to confront the climate crisis at home and abroad. We have a groundswell of concern and support for action from large segments of society. And we have a wide recognition that we can take strong action on climate change and seize the opportunity to rethink our infrastructure and jobs. These new realities had me feeling hopeful about the future. So I'm eager to share this moment with all of you and figure out how we can best make rapid progress together. Planning and problem solving begin with understanding. For more than 50 years, NOAA has invested steadily in observing, modeling, predicting, and understanding Earth's climate system. And we have increasingly incorporated social science into our public engagements to better understand the needs of Americans. We know that human-caused global warming and natural climate variability combine to produce extreme weather and climate events that impact human and natural systems. Over the last 4 decades, the annual average of billion-dollar natural disasters in the United States have quadrupled. The drivers of these disasters and their costs are not solely due to climate change. We know, for example, that more people are building, living, and working in harm's way, but climate change is driving a troubling trend. Our climate models project that climate-driven extreme events, including more heavy rain events, more extreme heat, even in the ocean, more drought, more wildfires, and stronger Atlantic hurricanes, will increase this century. Unless substantial, large-scale action is taken to address these and other climate risks, the impacts on human and natural systems are likely to worsen. A key question for us is, how can we provide decision makers with the data and information they need to take meaningful action on climate? Climate affects large areas over long periods of time, but communities and businesses take action on shorter timescales, often in finite geographies. Importantly, their actions are based on their priorities, their experiences, and their values. Our challenge in the context of this meeting is to strengthen the link between climate data and those local decisions. As people better understand the link between climate change and the things they care most about, the better able they will be to address climate-related risks. Let's take, for example, the city of Charleston, South Carolina. City officials there knew they had a growing problem with flooding, but they weren't sure how to prioritize, given limited funding, to improve resilience. Should they focus on tidal flooding, driven by sea level rise and storm surge, or perhaps on riverine flooding, given that Charleston sits where 4 major rivers meet the Atlantic, or perhaps on flash flooding, driven by very heavy rainfall, given that they've built large impervious surfaces on flat coastal lands with poor drainage. The officials worked with a variety of NOAA entities and partners to help them decide. The Carolinas Regional Integrated Science and Assessment Program helped provide local data. The South Carolina Sea Grant Program hosted community workshops. The local NOAA Weather Forecast Office helped emergency service providers provide the information needed about flood warnings. NOAA's Office of Coastal Management helped the city identify relevant tidal flooding, storm surge, and sea level rise data. NOAA's National Center for Environmental Information interpreted relevant sections of the National Climate Assessment and utilized their Climate at a Glance tool. NOAA's Climate Program Office provided the Climate Resilience Toolkits, Steps to Resilience Risk Assessment and Decision Support Framework, and downscaled climate projections from the Climate Explorer, a web-based resource that offers graphs and maps of a range of climate variables for every county in the contiguous United States. The city worked with UNC Asheville's National Environmental Modeling and Analysis Center, and Fernleaf, a private sector firm, to produce a vulnerability and risk assessment using the steps to resilience. They learned that heavy rainfall events, and not storm surge, present the greatest set of challenges. Today, Charleston is taking action to address its flood risks associated with very heavy rainfall events, and they're working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to plan for large engineering projects to mitigate their flood risks. This is important work, but did you catch that? 2 federal agencies, 9 entities from 4 NOAA line offices, and 2 actors from academia and the private sector working with the city to address its climate risks. This is no small feat. There's so much more at play than just Earth system science. We must place a high value on listening to people working in other domains of expertise. Every community is unique and faces its own challenges. There aren't necessarily right answers, but ranges of options with different trade-offs in costs and benefits. At NOAA, we will continue to focus on relevant science at the right scales of time and space to help people make no regrets choices for how to move forward, sustainably and equitably, even in the face of uncertainties. Let's dwell for a moment on equity. Climate risks are often greatest among our nation's poor, elderly, and minority populations. This fact was poignantly illustrated in a recent NOAA-funded citizen science campaign to map the hottest places in Richmond, Virginia. On one of the hottest days of summer, some Richmond neighborhoods were up to 16 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than other neighborhoods. The hottest places were predominantly covered with asphalt and concrete, but little or no tree shade. They were also in historically red-lined communities where the city's poorest populations and people of color live. Not surprisingly, those are the same places where most of the 911 calls for help were placed due to people experiencing heat stress and heat strokes. This is the kind of actionable intelligence local decision makers need to help them decide what to do and where to protect the most vulnerable and historically underserved communities. We need much, much more of this. The good news is that though each location is unique and may be grappling with its own distinct set of climate-related hazards, the resilience process unfolds in much the same way in every location and is, therefore, highly replicable. The Climate Resilience Toolkit's Steps to Resilience is a time-tested framework that helps communities document their climate hazards, decide which situations they most want to avoid, and come up with workable solutions to reduce those risks. To scale this kind of real and lasting resilience across the more than 30,000 communities in the United States, we need a climate services workforce that's able to meet demand nationwide. We need to train and prepare an interdisciplinary workforce in both the public and private sectors. Now is the time. Though we are already developing an all-of-government approach to confronting the climate crisis, that won't be enough. I think we need an all-of-society approach. We need to establish public-private partnerships that allow government scientists and service providers to work with professionals in commercial sectors, nonprofit organizations, and in academia, harnessing the strengths of each. My hope for the roundtable and my charge to each of the participants is, together, let's promote greater awareness and use of the data and tools that are already available. Let's leverage and build on those data and tools that have proven successful at helping people. Let's grow the community of resilience professionals that support local resilience planning. Let's provide expert guidance and train professionals so that we can scale up and accelerate the pace of local risk assessment and resilience building all across this nation. Doing these things together, I predict, will result in more peer learning across disciplines, which will in turn help drive our nation's nascent climate services enterprise to maturity. In closing, I want to thank each and every one of you for generously sharing your time and expertise. I look forward to seeing the results of our deliberations. To quote one of my favorite lines from the movie Airplane, there's no pressure. I just want you to know we're all counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett, and thanks to all our opening speakers for your very insightful remarks. Now I'm going to introduce our next three speakers, who will give brief lightning talks about examples of using data to understand and address climate risk. Crystal Lehman is the Deputy Director of Climate Resilience for the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Previously, she was a policy advisor in the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office, focused on clean energy strategies for vulnerable populations. She is a specialist in climate, resiliency, and energy policy. Today, she'll be speaking about the approach the White House is taking to climate risk and resilience and the vision laid out by President Biden. Next, Dr. Jennifer Jurado is responsible for leading climate resilience and environmental planning initiatives for Broward County, Florida. Her work focuses on urban adaptation, sustainable resource management, and clean energy strategies. For nearly 2 decades, she has guided the integration of science to inform resilient design standards and has led large-scale, multi-jurisdictional initiatives involving public-private partnerships. Dr. Jurado will discuss some of the strategies and steps that Broward County has taken to address its climate risks. Finally, Dr. Ed Kearns is the Chief Data Officer for the First Street Foundation and leads First Street's science and data activities related to quantifying and communicating climate risks. He previously served as Interim Chief Data Officer for the U.S. Department of Commerce and was appointed as NOAA's first Chief Data Officer in 2017, where he led the development of strategies for managing NOAA's data as a national asset. He promotes new uses and wider understanding of data through partnerships and technologies, such as First Street's floodfactor.com. He will talk about his work at NOAA and his work at First Street Foundation to make its flood data more accessible and applicable. Now, we'll hear first from Crystal Lehman.
Hello, I am Crystal Lehman, Deputy Director for Climate Resilience at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Thank you for inviting me to join you today, and a big thank you to the Roundtable Planning Committee for organizing this event. Today is an important conversation, identifying the types of data needed to address climate risk in disadvantaged communities and supporting communities to make data-driven decisions. This topic is important to me and the Biden administration because coupling data and science with planning and decision-making can improve a community's resilience against climate change and natural disasters. And it is no secret that it's usually the most historically undeserved and overburdened communities that have the toughest time recovering and rebuilding from a natural disaster. I am proud to say that on day one, we hit the ground running at the White House to support disadvantaged communities and build resilient strategies. President Biden is taking a whole of government approach to tackling the climate crisis and environmental justice. As part of these efforts, the President issued Executive Order 14,008. This executive order asks appropriate agencies to identify ways to expand and improve climate forecasting capabilities and information products for the public, and a consolidated federal geographic mapping service that can facilitate public access to climate-related information that will assist state, local, and tribal governments in climate planning and resilience activities. This EO also created the first ever White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, made up of 26 longtime environmental justice advocates and experts from all around the country who have already been on the ground working on these issues. This White House Council brings greater visibility to increase the federal government's efforts to address environmental injustice. We ensure that climate resilience is part of this conversation and ask advisory council members to provide advice and recommendations on a whole of government approach to environmental justice, including, but of course not limited, to climate change mitigation, resilience, and disaster management. At the White House, we are committed to pursuing environmental justice for communities of color, low-income communities, tribal and indigenous communities, and frontline and fence-line communities through policies like Justice 40 and our climate and economic screening tool. The Justice 40 initiative is an exciting opportunity that aims to deliver 40% of the overall benefits of relative federal investments in clean energy and infrastructure to historically disadvantaged communities. The Climate and Environmental Justice Screening Tool, which we are developing, will help us identify and target the communities most in need, and it will inform equitable decision-making across the federal government. Well, I am pleased to say agencies are already hard at work on these initiatives, and so is the White House Advisory Council. Last month, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council hosted its third public meeting to finalize their recommendations on Justice 40, the screening tool, and updates to Executive Order 12898. And now, CEQ is actively reviewing these recommendations. This administration also understands the need for a whole of government approach to tackle large climate issues that affect disadvantaged communities, which is why many of the EJ work streams are coordinated at the agency level through the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council. They consider the Advisory Council's recommendations on how to address current and historic environmental injustices. In addition, the White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy recently launched a new coastal resilience interagency working group. It will report to the National Climate Task Force, and this working group is co-led by CEQ and NOAA. This interagency body will coordinate major federal efforts to build coastal resilience and support data-driven strategies. It will also collaborate with U.S. state, local, tribal, and territorial governments to make effective and equitable investments. We also recognize that federal agencies have showcased various data and mapping strengths to support disadvantaged communities, such as CDC's Social Vulnerability Index, DOE's Low Income Energy Affordability Data Tool, and FEMA's National Risk Index. It is crucial to identify ways for communities and decision makers to best utilize these tools and many others, because like reports that can sit on a shelf, the same can occur with data, tools, and maps. We have a great opportunity to organize your expertise to make an impact, which is why this roundtable is so important. I'm looking forward to the outcomes of the conversation, in particular, methods to better support our disadvantaged communities. Solutions are attainable, but it takes strategic planning by and in communities to build their resilience to the impacts of climate change. We need to work together to ensure that disadvantaged communities have the opportunity to fully participate in planning for these risks and understanding the challenges many communities face with capacity, priorities, and technical expertise. It is especially important that we address the problem proactively through mitigating negative impacts and adapting to our already changing world. So I hope that you use this time at today's roundtable to connect with others in order to find opportunities to support each other and share best practices.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Hirado. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer for Broward County, and it's my pleasure to share today our efforts as a county in supporting community resilience and addressing climate risk. Much of what I'll be discussing today has been substantially aided by our work as a regional collaborative, so I just want to share that we are a partner in the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, now going on about 11 years. As a 4-county effort, we have worked to develop planning tools and guidance that support shared climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. And some of these key work products have included a regional vulnerability assessment, development of a regional sea level rise projection, a regional action plan, and that process has made for a robustness in deliverables that has aided its implementation at the local level. So shown here is one of our key deliverables, the Southeast Florida Regional Sea Level Rise Projection. It is really based upon a 50-year planning horizon. So we benchmark most of our planning efforts to 2070. We're looking today at a sea level rise projection of about 40 inches relative to 2010. And collectively, we do apply this projection in our modeling activities. However, it was recently updated, and so some of our planning efforts are actually just a little bit behind this projection. The other thing that I want to share is that we also did partner with NOAA to see the installation of a NOAA ports monitoring station at our Port Everglades. This now provides us with local sea surface elevations. This has been really important in terms of helping to improve model calibration, as well as look at the very specifics of surge impacts at a localized scale. So we've relied upon longer term data sets for the projection itself, but the local data ends up being really important when we're looking at our own models and really trying to explore the exposures of our local infrastructure. Well, with this with this joint adoption of the sea level rise projection, we then began to work at a local level to translate that guidance to some of our planning and regulatory tools. So this has included our development of a priority planning area map that we use to delineate areas at risk and help inform land use planning decisions and capital projects. And then at our county, we also adopted a future conditions map series in 2017, and we've adopted several additional maps and ordinances relating to this map series since that time, including a groundwater table map that informs our drainage infrastructure, a tide flood barriers ordinance, and we've just now adopted a future conditions 100-year flood elevation map that accounts for an intensification in the 100-year storm as well. So this next set of images shows that most recent exercise. Here in our development of the future conditions flood map, we accounted for 2 feet of sea level rise on our drainage and discharge of our stormwater system. We accounted for the effects of extreme tides, which layers on about another foot of water level. We modeled through downscaling processes a change factor of 13% for our rainfall events, and then we also assumed super saturation of the ground soil and loss of storage as part of this rain scenario. We then translated those water levels to various zones, and this is the map now that has been adopted as one of the tools that we use in setting finished floor elevations, and which will help inform infrastructure siting moving forward. Here are a few examples of how this work translates to infrastructure interests, including the evolution of flood levels in a residential setting, what this will mean to redevelopment. In this case, we would be building to this blue line if this home were reconstructed today. You can see the change in infrastructure requirements for a marina here in Hollywood, and then the change in the groundwater table is shown in this upper graphic, where you can see that shift relative to land surface and what it means for expansion of drainage infrastructure. So in closing, I would just note that regional models and local data are both important in vulnerability assessments. We've used scenarios to evaluate conditions and translate to recent events to help further explore the reality of these changes. We have worked with a stakeholder community in that engagement process, including the technical and private sector. We have worked to translate the results of these analyses to economic terms that are moved beyond the exposure to really look at the savings and additional benefits that come through deriving and making these investments in resilience. And finally, we've worked to translate those benefits to the immediate population and immediate economic considerations, not just those of a future community. And through that approach, we've been able to gain a lot of support for the efforts that I shared here today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ed Kearns from First Street Foundation. I'll be talking about assessing climate hazard data. I did serve as NOAA's first Chief Data Officer over the last few years before joining First Street Foundation, and helped reestablish the Commerce Chief Data Officer position as well. I led the NOAA Big Data Project, oversaw NOAA's data archive at the National Climatic Data Center, which is now known as the National Centers for Environmental Information, and also led the NOAA Climate Data Record Program. So I'm very familiar with climate data and how hard it is to use and how hard it is to make accessible. Worked a lot on that when I was at NOAA. And now at First Street, now I'm doing a different way of applying these data for climate assessment. So that's what I'll talk about today. from my experience, I would say that data access is one of these necessary but insufficient conditions for their use. You really need the expertise to understand how to interpret the data for the climate applications themselves. So at First Street, so we are a nonprofit foundation that is dedicated to the quantification and communication of flood risk to Americans. We have begun to use data from the federal government in order to create a flood assessment at the very personal level, at a property level across the United States, and including projections of climate change. So these are things right now that are not available to folks very easily. FEMA is sort of the state of the art right now as a gold standard, but FEMA flood maps are out of date. A lot of them are, it's done inconsistently across the United States, these kind of assessments, and they don't include projections of climate change. So First Street took on this challenge. We've assembled all sorts of different kinds of data from the federal government, most of them open federal government sources to bring to bear to this problem, including precipitation frequency data from NOAA, river flows from USGS, tide gauges from NOAA, CMIP-5 climate simulations that were downscaled by NASA Next. Bringing all these together, and it is a challenge to handle this much data of this kind of complexity to come up with climate assessments. But so that's what First Street has done. We've used a flood model to integrate this information and make it very personal by combining with real estate information from the private sector, combining the flood model outputs with the real estate information to generate a maximum flood depth at the building footprint for every property in America. And we are doing this for 2020 and going out to 2050. So we're building climate projections into that risk so we can let every American know how that risk is going to affect them in their home. We communicate this through a website called floodfactor.com. We give this data away for free. Our idea is to democratize this data, to kind of correct the data asymmetry that's in the marketplace right now, where some insurance companies and some investment groups have this kind of information, but the average everyday person on the street does not. We're putting this information out there for everybody to use for free, publicly available. We have downscaled to a 3-meter resolution so we can get very meaningful insights at that property level. And we've done integrations with Realtor.com, Redfin.com, and others. So we are providing our information, not just at the website, but along with other ways that people are viewing real estate information so they can become aware of their climate risk. So if I can sum up what the experience has been, over the last few years, including my last year or so at First Street, it's really about, access is important, but you really need to have expertise to maximize the value. Modern ways of accessing the data through the cloud are fantastic. How they're being served up, the format does matter. And the wider the community format, the wider the community of users is going to be. So for example, GRIB format is great for weather forecasters, but not so great for a generic data scientist where cloud optimized GeoTIFF is better. You definitely need that expertise to interpret the data, not just have access to it. Finding ways of aggregating other kind of a specific property level data sharing, data for research that is sensitive is very, very important too. Maximizing the scale of the applications by leveraging partnerships, particularly in the private sector, is a great tool. Some expertise can be introduced by transforming the data, by introducing the tools that people are already using. This is also a great way to accelerate the use of data. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thanks to our lightning talk speakers for a great set of talks and some very useful examples of using data to address climate risk. I'd like to now introduce 2 speakers from Amazon who have supported Code's work on this project. Dave Levy is the Vice President for US Government, Nonprofit, and Healthcare Businesses for Amazon Web Services. He helps government, enterprise, and nonprofit customers realize the potential of technology to transform their organizations and fulfill their missions. Prior to joining AWS, he worked for Apple Inc. for 12 years and led the teams that helped government usher in the age of mobile technology. His remarks today will touch on AWS's approach to climate risk and how their services are helping local communities address major climate hazards. Then we're going to hear from Dr. Ana Pinheiro-Privet, who is the lead on the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, or ASDI. ASDI is a program that seeks to leverage Amazon's scale, technology, and infrastructure to help create global innovation for sustainability. She was trained as an environmental engineer and as an earth sciences researcher at the New University of Lisbon and at MIT. After spending most of her career at NASA and NOAA as a scientist, she led projects for the White House climate portfolio, including the Obama Climate Data Initiative and the Partnership for Resilience and Preparedness, or PREP. She'll discuss how ASDI is supporting work like the NOAA Big Data Program and advancing efforts to address climate risk. And now we'll hear from Mr. Levy.
Hi, I'm Dave Levy, Vice President for U.S. Government, Nonprofit, and Healthcare for AWS, Amazon Web Services. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. AWS and Amazon are committed to building a sustainable business for our customers and the planet. In 2019, Amazon co-founded the Climate Pledge, a commitment to be net zero carbon across our business by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. Companies that have signed the Climate Pledge now number over 100 and agree to report carbon emissions annually, implement decarbonization strategies, and neutralize remaining emissions with credible offsets. As part of this pledge, Amazon has made ambitious commitments towards reaching this goal and is on a path to achieving 100% renewable energy usage for our global infrastructure by 2025. Amazon's commitment to increase the deployment of renewable energy resources is valuable for the planet, good for business, and important for our customers. As part of our sustainability efforts, Amazon advocates in support of public policy that advances access to the expansion of clean energy. AWS is focused on energy efficiency and continuous innovation in our data centers in order to reduce energy usage and increase operational excellence. Our scale allows us to achieve higher resource utilization and energy efficiency than the typical on-premise data center. In fact, international analyst firm 451 Research found that AWS's infrastructure is 3.6 times more energy efficient than the median of surveyed enterprise data centers, with more than 2/3 of this advantage due to a more energy efficient server population and a higher server utilization. We have the report on our website if you'd like to read it. AWS customers use our services to make faster progress on their own sustainability goals. In addition to our analytics, IoT, and machine learning services, AWS hosts geospatial and environmental data sets like Earth on AWS, and AWS Cloud credits for research are available to support research using this Earth observation data on AWS. Big problems require we all bring our best to the table. AWS enables faster, cheaper, and better experimentation, which supports innovation. We are helping our customers develop and expand workloads that support the needs of carbon neutral and resilient societies, enabling organizations to build new scientific knowledge and translate it into actionable insights that actually help us make better decisions. Data is at the core of this process. Data is required to measure, monitor, and manage climate processes. The cloud's scalable infrastructure can help us make sure that data and knowledge are more easily accessible by anyone. At AWS, we're committed to help federal agencies make their foundational and authoritative data more accessible and more usable. And we've partnered with NOAA and NASA to move petabytes of data to the cloud. This includes weather and climate data hosted on AWS, allowing for easier, faster, and cheaper data analysis. By hosting foundational data on the AWS cloud, the NOAA Big Data Program, or BDP, in collaboration with Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, or ASDI, seeks to remove some of the redundant efforts that customers have to endure when discovering, accessing, and using NOAA data to support its workloads. Most of a data scientist's efforts is often associated with time-consuming data set acquisition and wrangling tasks rather than model development and knowledge creation. NOAA data staged on AWS addresses this issue by enabling both more efficient data access and analysis, and customers no longer need to acquire and maintain the data, and in addition can leverage AWS scalable computing and scalable services right next to the data. As this data is staged in the cloud, it is an enabling government agencies to better perform against their mission, and businesses are able to build on top of the data and bring new solutions to the market to help address pressing issues like climate change and support economic development. Let's look at a practical example. After severe extreme weather events like hurricanes and flooding, some of the largest challenges include identifying the level of destruction and assessing how much infrastructure has been destroyed or relocated. Timely access to baseline, prior to event, and post-event remote sensing imagery over affected areas is often critical to enable disaster response teams to take action and ensure that lives are properly protected. To minimize latency in accessing the data, the NOAA Emergency Response Imagery, or ERI, is now available on AWS. This work is possible due to the collaboration between NOAA Big Data Program, ASDI, and the AWS Open Data Program. By providing NOAA's ERI data to the public via an Amazon Simple Storage Service, or Amazon S3 bucket, users can access and analyze data in the cloud with low latency and use other AWS services as well as other data sets available in the ASDI catalog. This simplified access to cloud services is particularly helpful for users performing artificial intelligence and those extracting knowledge and insights that support effective disaster response. We are committed to playing an enablement role in this space and are eager to understand how AWS and Amazon in general can support building more sustainable and resilient communities. We believe that AWS can play a key role in building this space by improving collaboration, facilitating access to data and tools, and bringing our scale and expertise to the table. We look forward to working closely with the climate risk communities to better understand and serve your needs. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. My name is Ana Pinheiro-Privetz. I'm the lead of the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, and I sit on the sustainability team at Amazon. So following Dave Levy's remarks, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce you to the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, which is a Tech for Good program that Amazon has been running for several years now, and that seeks to leverage Amazon's scale, our technology, our infrastructure to really promote more innovation and problem solving in the space of sustainability, where obviously climate resilience falls in. What we're trying to do is to leverage this technology to reduce the cost, the time, and the technical barriers that are required to analyze large data sets and extract any knowledge and insights required for us to make more effective decisions. So just to give you a quick background on the program, and also to make you aware of the resources that we are bringing to the community that might be of value to the conversation we're having today and to the climate resilience space in general. So we have built the program around 3 core areas. The first one is focused on the democratization of data. And here what we're trying to do is really recognize that there are data sets out there that are really critical for this conversation that traditionally are difficult to access, but also that there's a lot of effort, repetitive effort that the community has been doing. So once we identify those data sets, we work to the extent possible with the data providers and subsidize bringing the data to the cloud, hosting it, and making it openly and freely available to anybody. So you don't even need to have an AWS account if you want to access the data. So We have created an extensive catalog so far. It's a curated catalog, but we have petabytes of data there. Has anything from historical records of weather forecast. We have been working with the Earth System Grid Federation to bring the CIMET-6 to the cloud as well. A lot of satellite imagery, so just feel free to explore. The second component of the program is focused on bringing the compute and analytical capabilities next to the data. So now we have all this data in the cloud, more easily accessible and findable and usable. But now, how do we encourage experimentation on top of it? How do we offset the cost of that experimentation? And one of the mechanisms we have created is basically through cloud grants. So we have an open call for proposals through our website. You can find it. And basically, we generally subsidize the period of 1 year of free compute for solutions related to sustainability. So that's something that is available out there for those that would like to experiment or take existing workloads and bring an experiment in the cloud. In particular, those that are focused on the data that we're making available are more compelling grants for us to provide. Okay, and the third one is very focused on promoting knowledge exchange. And what we mean there is that there's really a recognition that this space needs to move as fast as we can, and we can all move this faster if we work together and share our knowledge, right? So we're very eager here to be an enablement, play an enablement role where we encourage, customers and the community to tell their stories, their best practices, lessons learned, share their code to the extent possible, write tutorials, host webinars. So there's a myriad of things that we've been trying to do in that space. I'll just stop here now and just reiterate our commitment to this space, to the open data, and hopefully to building a value chain that can support climate resilience, in particular in vulnerable communities, which we are very committed to. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dave and Anna, and thanks to all our speakers for those really terrific presentations. We're very lucky that we have most of our speakers back for Q&A. If I could just ask all the speakers to please turn on your cameras, and I'll be asking you to unmute as we go. We have a little bit of time left, and we have one question for each of you. And then just fair warning, at the end, I'm going to ask each of you to just give us a sentence or two to sum up what you most hope people will take away from this webinar. But let's go around the virtual room in the order in which people presented. And Don Graves, I'd like to start with you if Don's on. Yes, great. So Don, if you could turn on your camera, please. Okay. Excellent, thank you, and welcome, and thanks again so much for joining us. So we wanted to ask a question of you from the perspective of Department of Commerce. People generally think of the department as a quote unquote kind of economic department, and yet it includes NOAA and other science-driven and data-driven bureaus. How do you see all of the work we've heard about today from NOAA and others serving the overall mission of the Department of Commerce as they work to reduce climate risk for communities around the country? And how does it fit in, and how does the Department of Commerce support that overall work?
Well, thanks for that great question. I have really 2 points to make about that. First, our economy, as we all know, and as we've been talking about, is really driven by data and science. You can't separate our economic growth, our economic opportunities from data and science. And that's really why I think that the department is often known as the Department of Business, but it's actually the Department of Science, Data, and Innovation. So, I think it's important to remember that. The second point that I would make is that it's pretty clear that our nation's economic well-being is inextricably tied to climate change. As I noted in my opening remarks, last year alone, we saw record-setting 22 weather and climate events that cost the U.S. over $96 billion. So because of those 2 points that I was making, the department has to prioritize climate research. It has to integrate climate data and information into every aspect of the department's activities. The integration has to also account for equitable climate considerations, As we know, climate change disproportionately affects low-income, vulnerable households, low-income communities, underserved communities, and communities of color. In addition, the department can prioritize blue-green economic initiatives that will help our economy build back better and will lead to eventually to good-paying jobs. NOAA and Commerce's other bureaus, including NIST and the Patent and Trademark Office, the Economic Development Administration, they can all contribute to the department's efforts and those of the federal government in that regard by marrying the data, the science with decisions around our economy. As we've heard today, climate change is a multifaceted issue that has to be dealt with and addressed in a multidisciplinary and all hands on deck approach. It's not just an individual bureau like NOAA. It's not just the Department of Commerce. It's all of the federal government working in concert with our partners in the private sector, in our research institutions, and in the nonprofit sector. The Department of Commerce, I think, is pretty well poised to bring all of these different disciplines, the diverse perspectives, the diverse sets of partners together to address the climate crisis and do so in a way that is economically and viable and also equitable.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And really wonderful to have that broad perspective. Thank you. So Ben Friedman, we'll turn to you now for the NOAA perspective. And again, thank you to NOAA so much for working with us to co-host the webinar and the roundtable tomorrow. What are some of the other strategies and tools that NOAA is using to increase this kind of stakeholder engagement with the public? Just very, very briefly.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here. Well, let me just start by saying that NOAA is a great science agency, but we mark our success not just based on our great science, but on delivering great products and services to the American public. And so we're ultimately really a service agency, and public interaction and engagement with the public is at the core of everything we do. And I don't have an opportunity to talk about everything we do engaging with the public, but just to give you a handful of examples, we, for example, have a regional coordination network where we place employees throughout the country to work with decision makers at the local, state, and federal levels. And through that, we've had some great successes. Just to give you one, there's dozens, but in the Great Lakes, for example, we've worked with state officials and local officials to work with farmers to make sure that they have the best weather data to know when to use fertilizer in their crops so that there isn't runoff into the Great Lakes. And just by providing that data, we've significantly reduced the runoff to the Great Lakes. And the farmers love it because they have the best data to make sure that their fertilizer is actually working and not ending up in the Great Lakes. So just something as simple as that has been very effective. We have the Regional Integrated Science and Assessment Program, what we call RISA. This is 11 different programs across the country that work, again, with local, state, and federal officials and the private sector to kind of be the in-between between research and operations. So they provide the great information and they look for tools that can be used at the local levels to really address climate issues, whether it's climate training, whether it's providing climate data, whatever it is. They're kind of the go-between between the researchers and the decision makers at the local level. We have the Sea Grant program, which is a program that's existed for over 50 years. There's 34 individual programs. They're university-based across the country in coastal areas in the Great Lakes. And we work closely with local officials to deal with local climate issues through the Sea Grant program. And then our Office of Coast Management has a whole series of programs to work with decision makers on climate issues, including our NEARS program, the Estuary program, working with coastal zone issues, working with coral reef issues. So that's an office that provides a lot of services as well. And I'll just finish by saying climate.gov is a NOAA-run website, award-winning website that provides great information and services to communities around the country. And you know, we're currently actually going around doing regional climate listening sessions with communities to see what their needs are and how we can provide better services. Again, don't have time to talk about everything, but we have a whole range of products and programs designed to interact with communities and make sure that our data and our information is actually being used by communities around the country.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much. I mean, it's an amazing overview and really a great kind of synthesis of the ways that NOAA interacts with communities. I want to note we're right at the hour, but we're going to take a few more minutes because I really do want to have a chance to ask a bit of each of the speakers and hope that everyone listening can stay on for a bit more, and hope speakers can as well if that's okay. But Barrett, what we just heard from Ben is really a great segue into the question I was going to ask you. You gave really a wonderful example of how NOAA's different bureaus and offices supported the city of Charleston in addressing its flood risk. And I wonder if just very briefly you could tell us sort of how you think this kind of collaboration might be scaled to support other kinds of other vulnerable communities as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's precisely what we aim to do at NOAA with our partners, scale up and accelerate this kind of collaboration to support other vulnerable communities. For example, over the past 5 years or so, the same kind of collaborative approach to resilience planning using the climate resilience toolkits, steps to resilience, has occurred in over 30 municipalities in the Southeast. In fact, it was so interesting to listen to Jennifer's presentation because the steps to resilience were employed in her example from Broward County. And building on those same proven tools and techniques, NOAA plans to launch a new Climate Smarts Communities initiative next year designed to scale up and accelerate the pace of resilience planning, equity and inclusion in resilience planning. You know, in many, many more U.S. communities. So it's a central focus of our work moving forward. And I think we see a particular need to center equity and inclusion in our resilience planning because there have been historically some service equity gaps for these low income and minority communities. Our boots on the ground activities have been working on this gap, and Ben just mentioned some of them in his response. But because of that, NOAA is positioned to scale up these services so that all communities, businesses, tribes, states, and federal agencies in the US have access to our world-class climate information, tools, and services so they can make informed decisions about the future. But honestly, the need is so great. We really need an army of trained climate adaptation experts working with trusted local leaders to employ the solutions that are needed all across the board.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And now Jennifer Jurado, building on that question as well. And this is a question from someone in the audience. So wanted to know how vulnerable local residents and vulnerable communities can access the kind of planning tools that are being developed in Broward County and others in the Southeast. How do you make that kind of connection?
Well, I'm actually really pleased to answer that because we've struggled a great deal with regards to communications and how do you get that information out there and in a digestible form. And interestingly, a lot of this work has also been informed by our business community who has been interested in helping with the communication. So just a couple of months ago, we launched a resilience dashboard. It can be viewed at broward.org/resilience. And I think it's very powerful in that it paints a picture with regards to the exposures that, and I'm going to acknowledge it's largely flood-based, but we'll be adding the heat map work as we move better in that direction. But it really explores the challenges for our community. It provides both inland and coastal examples of exposures. It presents all of the action plans that we have at the Broward County level, at the 4-county level. It includes a whole dashboard, and we call it a dashboard within the dashboard of all the planning tools, all the future conditions map. We link to flood risk, which I'm just thrilled that Ed has been really gracious in sharing his work, so community members can get in there. But in addition to that, we also have a resilience project showcase, clean energy showcase. And so once you've explored all that information, then you can begin to look at your local municipality, and the municipalities all have tabs in there as well. And you can see, where are the resilient investments being made? Are they happening in my community? If they're not happening in my community, why not? And you can also see physical examples of what those resilient investments deliver and how they're beneficial. So we're in the process of working on a countywide plan that brings all that type of infrastructure planning together for multi-decade. And in terms of building support for a plan, I think it's really important to start to give community members examples of what they can stand to gain and how those investments can support conditions that are being realized in their community. And there's a lot more to the dashboard than I've just shared, but it's very engaging, and it's not just passive one-way receipt of information. And we're working with the school districts and making this available. With the Broward School District is another learning tool. So again, very excited about having brought that to our community.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I want to mention that we will be sending out a link to the recording of this webinar to everybody who is registered afterwards. We're also going to include some links for resources like this and other resources that people have been generous enough to share in chat as well. So Ed, let me just follow up with a very quick question to you. You talked about how Flood Factor tries to put flood risk data into the hands of users outside of the private sector. Just in about 30 seconds or so, can you tell us how you think the data can be used to support civil society groups in vulnerable communities? And then after that, Ed, Anna, I'm going to ask you to lead off with our wrap up and be the first person to give us maybe a 2-sentence summary of what you hope people will most take away from this webinar. But Ed, tell us a little bit about Flood Factor, if you would, just quickly.
Sure, thanks, Joel. Yeah, so all the data that's behind Flood Factor, First Street is committed to making those data available under a non-commercial data license to any government agency, from federal government all the way down to the local municipalities. So those data can be used in bulk for analysis for the kind of work that Jennifer was just describing. So we're actively seeking those kind of relationships. The other thing that we're really trying to accelerate the use of this data. Time is of the essence, right? So there's a lot of resources that need to be brought to bear that Jennifer's group has been successful in bringing about, that we heard NOAA's helping Charleston doing. This is really difficult to do, and trying to understand these data is tough. So First Street has been trying to boil all this complicated data down into some very usable risk indexes and economic impact estimates that can be readily picked up and used. But we understand even those data can be hard for some municipalities to use. So we are also seeking partners, whether it's engineering firms or mapping partners, other folks that can convey that information to those local agencies in a very easy to use way, so they can accelerate their planning activities.
Fantastic. Ed, thank you. So let's wrap up. Anna, first, I want to thank you again, you and Amazon, both the Sustainability Development Data Initiative, and Amazon Web Services for supporting our work on this webinar and tomorrow's roundtable. I think this has been an incredibly information-rich webinar. So given everything that we've heard, I'm going to ask you first, and then I'm going to go through every speaker, and we'll wrap up quickly. In 1 or 2 sentences, what do you most hope that people will take away from the webinar today?
Thank you, Joel, and thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this process and support it. I would say that it's been very evident by everything that everyone said today that we need to move fast, and the best way to move forward is to bring the best of everybody to the table. It needs to be quite of an agile process, right? Let's experiment, bring to the surface what's working and the best practices that are emerging. So I think it's the need for the private sector and everybody to be at the table playing a role.
Everybody to the table, move quickly. Thank you. Ed Kearns, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, anything we can do to accelerate the data use. I guess I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but it is so important to not just to get the data into everybody's hands, but to bring the experts that can interpret it along the way.
Terrific. Jennifer Geraldo, your summary for people watching.
I would acknowledge the power of partnerships, not to be intimidated by the data that we may not understand. You can see that there's a number of individuals, resources, entities who are out there to help translate, and utilizing science can be effectively and is successful in helping to support the decision making that leadership is prepared to undertake when it's demonstrated to be robust and defensible. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Co Barrett.
I would say the need is great, but the resources are also great, and together we can solve this problem.
Perfect. And Ben Friedman, and with thanks again to you and to NOAA for making this all possible. We really appreciate it. How would you sum up the takeaways you hope people will take away from today?
I guess I would just say that, yes, as Co said, the need is great. The climate crisis is the biggest one facing humanity maybe ever, but we're up to the task. NOAA's up to the task. The federal government's up to the task. We have a lot of resources going into this, and use our resources and our services. We're here. That's why we're here, and we want to help and support.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think that's a perfect note to end this public webinar. Thank you also to everybody watching for allowing us to go a bit over time, but I think it's been very information rich, and really appreciate all of our speakers, both for your presentations and for this Q&A session we've just had. We're going to take about a 1-minute break. This is the end of the public webinar for today. If you are attending the roundtable tomorrow, please stay on, because we'll have some instructions for you following in just a minute. I do want to repeat, we're going to be sending out a follow-up email with a link to view the webinar, some other information. We've gotten some questions and comments in chat that we're doing our best to answer individually, but we really want to thank both the speakers and everybody who's joined us today for this really terrific discussion. So thank you all. And if you're attending the roundtable, we'll see you a minute from now. Thank you.